Next item up is the lead scientist report. Dr. Goodwin.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gosh, there's a lot of things going on in science. So if I miss anything, perhaps I'd ask members of the science program at the end of each item, please feel free to chime in. Firstly, I'd just like to make the comment that Mr. Knopp made earlier. Anke announced to the IEP meeting yesterday that she would be leaving IEP in a very structured way, so there won't be a void there. But of course, Anke is truly a force of nature, as you know. Her intellectual curiosity, her passion for science is clearly going to be sorely missed, although she's going to stay heavily engaged in your California water issues with the USGS.
Is she staying in California?
Absolutely, she's staying locally too. So she's still going to be part of the science scene for sure. And of course, the great thing about Anke, you never have to say to her, but what do you really think about this? So a big change there. Before I get into the written items, I thought I would just fill you in on a few things which are going on, particularly this week. Currently, there's the California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum. This has been going on in Folsom. Traditionally, this is held in collaboration with the IEP annual workshop, with an overlap day that was yesterday. In addition to that, the Independent Science Board chose to have their February meeting co-located in Folsom, so it allowed scientists to drift in and out between the two events, and the ISB members could also participate in the sessions of their particular expertise. So Dr. Collier just said, gave me a few things he thought you might be interested in, as he could not be here today. The ISB meeting was focused on the BDCP review that they're preparing, and he made it very clear in his opening addresses that, if you know Dr. Collier, he does everything by the book, and in the spirit of openness and transparency, as the ISB is developing their initial thoughts, you'll see that those documents are posted on the web, and those are very, very rough documents, but as Tracy said, we discuss everything as a group, as they did for 2 days straight, but they wanted to have stuff out there so people of the public can respond to it. But he did point out there's some very rough things in there, and your comments about how the ISB folks get together. So he just wanted to clear that. As part of that, Cassandra, who's spoken to you several times before, brought in her BDCP team. She also had a very nice summary which is posted of the questions which the ISB raised at their last meeting. She produced a very nice table that responded directly to those questions. And there was a very in-depth discussion, which you can see on the record, between the ISB members and the various BDCP folks. And the ISB is still committed to producing their interim report by March the 27th. We know there's been an extension, but they said, well, we promised we would produce this interim assessment, and they're going to meet that date or be very, very close to it. The other topic they discussed at length was science and the drought, and I'll talk about that further in a moment. So that was the ISB meeting. I thought I would just talk a little bit about the QEMF and IEP conferences. For those of you who are listening into this meeting, you can find both the IEP if you go to their webpage. The full program is on their webpage, and similarly for QEMF, CWEMF. If you just Google that, it'll take you to their webpage. And I'll just circulate this in case the council members, if everything else I got to say is boring, you might like to just see what's been going on this week.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll circulate those. But just a couple of observations. In the last 2 years, you see things in the general press about conferences. And just to give you an idea of what's been going on, it's not just the networking. You'll see the schedule. It starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. It runs to 4:30. There's then evening activities that often run till 10 o'clock at night or afterwards. And I thought I would just highlight a couple of the evening sessions. On Tuesday night, there was a discussion on benchmarking models and how we compare different models. How is it done elsewhere? And so the conference organizers had brought in several international folks from the European Union who are describing how they do benchmarking of models there. And it was actually very interesting. Here we're dealing with the biggest drought possibly in modern times. The folks who came over from the UK had just experiencing the wettest winter on record. And it was quite amazing to see some of their pictures. The flooding you see in the news is not levees overtopping. The rainfall has been so intense that when you have levees and intense rainfall occurring inside the levees, the storm sewers simply couldn't cope. So you're getting flooding from within levees rather than overtopping. So associated with what we're seeing, whether it's going into just a wetter era or we're beginning to see the effects of climate change, essentially it looks like the UK are going to have to redesign their entire storm sewer system. Then last night we had, again, an evening session that was co-hosted with IEP, QEMF, and many other agencies, specifically to look at the interim science action agenda. And the organizing committee for this evening session posed it around a series of questions. So it was almost like speed dating. There were a series of tables and people moved around to give their thoughts on different issues that the organizing committee had posed. So those are the evening addresses. I'd also just like to comment that the keynote for QEMF this year was given by Gary Bardini from the Department of Water Resources. And he gave just an extraordinary talk. And I think it shows in California how frequently we see the leaders of our agencies have really come up through the trenches. So here's Gary Bardini, came up through modeling, new modeling backwards. And he gave an intriguing history of modeling to inform water decisions in California. And I thought it would be of particularly interest to the council that he finished with, he broke it down by decades. And he referred to this decade as the decade of balance. And of course, the inference to the co-equal goals. So really a very interesting talk. He also spoke about risk. And risk from the perspective, we have to be prepared to take risks if we're going to solve this problem. We can't continue to operate in such a narrow band. But wonderful talk. A couple of other things where the Delta Science Program was heavily involved. Yesterday lunchtime, Chris Enright led a discussion on scoping for the modeling summit. If you recall, in the Delta Science Plan, we were proposing to host 2 summits this year. I'll talk about the Environmental Data Summit in a moment, but the second summit was taking a look at modeling and the future of models. It's not just the discipline-specific models like hydrodynamics, but in order to answer many of these questions, we need to integrate models so different discipline-specific models can talk to one another to begin to unravel the complexity of the system. So again, Chair Fiorini, it comes back, I think, to your comments at the original town hall that started the Delta Science Program. And what Chris Enright did was, it was a nice talk. He spoke for about 10 minutes where he highlighted the numerous recommendations and reports that have been put out on this topic in the last 10 years. And that posed the question is, well, we've had all of this, now's the time for action. So that was the kickoff for planning the modeling summit. One other thing I'd like to just talk about that followed on from that discussion, and here I keyed off both Mr. Bardini's keynote lecture and Chris Enright's session at lunchtime. And at the end of the day yesterday, I had the opportunity to talk at the end of one of the modeling sessions, and it was a little humbling because if you look at that session, it was all of the key models which are really driving decisions. So there was Steve Linley with the salmon life cycle model, Ken Newman on the Delta Smelt model, and the other speakers were describing modeling efforts that are feeding into these bigger efforts. And the first thing listening to those presentations was somewhat of relief. We had just come out of the State Water Resources Control Board exploratory workshop that I'll talk, where there was some really great discussion about where the gaps were in knowledge, particularly in modeling. And it was quite a relief to see that many of those issues, you could almost go down the checklist, they were covered. But I chose to talk about something a little bit different. And we now have the Delta Science Plan. And I drew the analogy of a few years ago, there was a scientific review of the Venice Canals project. So for those of you who followed the international news, this is a huge issue. Venice is sinking. The solution is this heavily engineered fix of gates, which is very controversial. And one of the members of the review panel was Professor Jörg Imberger, former Caltech, Berkeley. He's been in Western Australia for the last 20 years. He's probably one of the top 5 researchers on environmental issues worldwide. And he made a very interesting comment on the panel. And he compared Venice Canals with Yosemite here in California. And the point he made was that both of these sites are national icons, a place of national pride. And it's publicly owned. And in that comparison, he said, so, well, what does publicly owned mean in Venice? It actually meant that no one took responsibility for the system. And he was pointing to the litter and everything else that floats around. This was a few years ago. They've certainly improved. And he compared that with how the American people treat Yosemite. So if you're hiking in Yosemite and you see a beer can, 99% of people would pack it out. So the difference is that everyone takes responsibility. So the point was, with the Delta Science Plan, are we going to be a Yosemite, or are we going to be the Venice Canals? And so then I went on to describe what different regions of the US, and I could have added international examples, what other groups are doing to get together to solve problems. And good examples, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, the Discovery and Innovation Center in Wisconsin. And compare that with the intellectual capacity that we have here in California. 6 of the world's top 20 universities, according to the Chinese survey, are here in California. And so we posed what could actually be here in terms of innovation for modeling and synthesis. And we hope to carry that type of concept into the Modeling Summit. What can we actually create here? Why are much smaller states, some with 1 million people population? Why do they have these centers where they can get folks together to really address these issues? So we hope to carry some of these concepts through on the Modeling Summit. Also going on at the meeting, and this was a suggestion from Chair Fiorini, it also connected with some of the thinking going on in IEP. And that question, and I should say many other agencies too, and that is, under this drought scenario, there's a lot of monitoring going on, a lot of actions being taken to try and minimize the potential catastrophic consequences of the drought. Some things we can control. The reality is many of these things are going to be out of our control when we're looking at some of the nature reserves and things like that. And so one of the things we're in the process of doing is trying to put together a common list from the full spectrum of the scientific community. What science questions can we actually address given this nature scent experiment? If we wanted to do this experiment, you'd never ever get permits to stress the system to the level we're going to see this year. And so our idea is to try and compile all of these various thoughts so that whichever agency you're in, whatever pots of money comes, there's a list where we can start checking things off and look to see what are the critical gaps. As Sam Howard has said this morning, a lot of it, we just need to get out there, collect data. We don't have time for experimental designs, but let's at least try and understand the potential consequences. So to help this, the IEP workshop organizers very kindly set aside a room at the Natoma Inn where the conference is going on. It's the drought room. And what we've done is to compile all of the questions and ideas from IEP, from our own staff, and many others. And these are posted around the room. And then there's the opportunity for people to come in and add their thoughts in Post-its. And we hope to be able to compile this in the coming few days. Also in that same room, we have this Interim Science Action Agenda. The poster that's in your package is displayed there, and we're also encouraging people to do a similar thing. There's the outline of the Interim Science Action Agenda there. You express your thoughts and add to that. Okay, and we hope this will be a very rapid way of assimilating and organizing that information. One other thing, I hold the date for everyone listening in or in the room here, and certainly for any of the council members, we would welcome your attendance. The Delta Science Conference dates have been fixed. It's October the 28th to the 30th, 2014. The conference co-chairs are Dr. Wim Kimmerer, who last conference you won our most prestigious award, and Lenny Grimaldo. And I think we've just had the first couple of organizing committee meetings, but there's some real innovations that are being developed. How do you link science with policy? So we'll keep you informed as that thinking evolves in the coming weeks. Also for potential dates, I mentioned the 2 summits. Originally, our schedule on this, given everything that was going on, was to host these in the early fall. What we heard for both of the summits is that, no, this is really important, and particularly for potential funding opportunities down the road. So the Environmental Data Management Summit in the era of big data will be June the 5th and 6th, 2014. We're just working on location for that. It's entirely open. We have a really heavily engaged organizing committee. These meetings are entirely open. So we've had visitors from outside participating in that. The meeting we had on Tuesday, several of the ISB meetings members sat in to find out what was going on. And from the science program, Rainer Honecker and George Isaac are leading that. For the Modeling Summit, next week we'll be moving ahead with the organizing committee, and Chris Enright and myself will be leading that from the Delta Science program. Okay, are there any questions on that? If not, I'll get to the written part of the report. Any other thoughts?
Any questions of Dr. Goodwin? Please proceed.
Okay. Did I miss anything yet, Sam? Okay. So the first item here is the BDCP effects analysis review. This is a peer review process, and both with this and the next item there, I'd really like to acknowledge Sam Harada, who this was his part of the science plan, and he's really thought through both the peer review process and how we can maximize the outcomes from exploratory workshops. And so the BDCP analysis occurred on January the 28th and 29th. It was webcast and recorded, so you can go online and watch the discussions. The panel concluded, yes, this is really complex, amongst many, many other questions. And just observing that personally, I thought it was a very, very constructive dialogue. And David Zippen and his team that came in, really this, I thought, was how review should happen. It was just a great interchange between the scientists themselves. The online viewers, we had almost 200 at a time, so the room was very crowded the first day, less crowded the second day, but clearly a lot of interest, of course, and a lot of people tracking it online. That report, I should say, is coming out. It will be due in mid-March, so I'll give you a more detailed account and summary when that report is available. The State Water Resources Control Board Outflows and Associated Stresses workshop was hosted on February the 10th and 11th. This, of course, was at the request and in collaboration with the staff at the State Water Resources Control Board. Sam Harada, Matt Holland, and Diane Riddle in particular led the organization of this. And if you recall, partly driven by the federal shutdown and partly because Sam was leading a lot of thought about how we can make these workshops most effective, we took a little more time. And the panel that came in were really well informed. The organizing committee for this workshop spent a lot of time thinking what information should the panel look at. They provided you links to the exploratory workshops that the State Board hosted in the summer and fall of 2013, so they picked out the parts which they thought would be of most use to the panel. And it was quite clear the panel came in much better informed. They gave a heads up of what they thought was important, what they wanted to hear, and also it allowed the speakers to come prepared. So many of these issues are so complex, it's not just one individual, but they could have the important people at the table with them. This panel report is also due in mid-March. Of course, it's really to get at the heart of what is best available science on delta outflows and related stresses, to inform the update of the Bay Delta Plan. And this report will just be advisory to help guide the board members in their decisions. Just to highlight a couple of things, if you're skipping through the webcast, I thought the questions were really good. Again, the panel, I thought, demonstrated it wasn't like a PhD defense. They asked very probing questions. Once they saw where it was going or where the information was, they just backed away and it went somewhere else. So the dialogue was very courteous, very constructive. And I thought the exchange in particular between Dr. Steve Culbertson and Dr. Kenny Rose was probably one of the best explanations about how there isn't a single magic bullet. You can't just do one thing and expect it's going to solve the problem for this species. And so it was like a 5-10 minute in-depth exchange, but between the two of them, they really, it was extremely clear. The other thing that I thought was very interesting is one of the experts that came in really discussed the efficiency and effectiveness of the sampling programs and raised some extremely insightful and good points. And again, it was great to see Ken Newman and the modelers yesterday showing how they have already anticipated that concern and including it in their models. So again, mid-March, that will be out. And I think it's likely to be a very in-depth discussion. Anything you wish to add to that, Sam? Okay. The next item is the CARBA seminars. This is a partnership we value very greatly with the University of California at Davis, the Center for Aquatic Biology and Aquaculture. And again, this is one of our activities that I think we've dramatically improved over the last year or so. The idea is to pick one of the hot topics, provide a forum where anybody interested, particularly from the science community, can get together and explore some of these issues in depth. And as part of this restructuring, what we've been doing is, where possible, to first of all have an expectation that for these panels that come in, and this is a totally unpaid labor of love, but we expect a peer review publication to come out of it. So we want to hit a big issue, get the best thinking, and get a peer-reviewed article out there that would establish the state of the science or recommendations for the future, something worthwhile. Secondly, we've been bringing, where possible, in an international speaker, national speakers from outside the Delta, and then, of course, our regional experts. So it encourages a dialogue between the various speakers and also has that reality check from outside. So this particular workshops, Marina Brand and Garrett Lyles have been working on this restructuring of how we run the CARBA workshops. And the convener of this particular one was Brian Bergamaschi with the USGS. The international speaker was Dr. Sami Soucy, who is from the University of Lille in France, and he's working on the Seine estuary, the river that goes through Paris. The national speaker was Dr. Mark Brush from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and he spoke very specifically about nutrient dynamics modeling. Just a couple of comments. I would certainly encourage you to flick through it. What was very interesting, I thought, in Dr. Seuss's talk, he was describing at the end of his talk about the importance of networking. And so he put up a figure of the Seine and how the European Union are funding linkages between different estuaries at different latitudes. And there's many advantages to doing that, but one of those, of course, these systems, they all have different forcing, but the further north you go, or from north to south, you're beginning to be able to anticipate differences in the ecosystem. So if we look at climate change and temperature structure, you can begin to perhaps anticipate test models to provide more information and knowledge of what to expect in the future. The other talk I thought that was really excellent was Dr. Wim Kimmerer. I think that was one of the best talks I've heard him give. And he really spoke a lot about the bounds of possibility. How far can you really push this system in different directions? So very, very engaging talk, and as always, Dr. Kimmerer has something different to add. Why is this important? Well, the lower food web dynamics within estuaries is critical, particularly when we start looking at habitat restoration. So if we're expecting habitat restoration to result in a more productive food web, with the idea that particularly the lower trophic levels are going to work up through the system and have an impact on our endangered fish species, it's really important to understand, is that a likelihood? And how effective is this habitat restoration going to be? So some great talks in there, and of course when the peer review article comes out, you'll get copies of that, and perhaps as we did last time, we'll have Dr. Bergamaschi, if he's willing to come and you give that a summary of the paper.
Good.
The science action agenda, I think, I mentioned that before. We have a draft. We've been going through a very detailed synthesis of the documents which are out there, the IEP work plan, other agency work plans, the recommendations that have been put out by the national academies, the peer review panels that have been done by us and others, the workshops which we undertake, and, of course, supplementing that with input from the science community, particularly from the activities that are going on this week. And I think, actually I should have written a note. So our goal is to have a fairly complete draft out for public review by early April, or as a public comment, with the refined draft out in May. Did I get that right, Sam? I think so. The last topic here is the Collaborative Adaptive Management Team report that has just been submitted 2 weeks ago to Judge O'Neill. And you have in front of you the report that was put together by Kant. And I'd just like to make a few comments about what went into that report and where they are right now. So I think the first comment to make is that they made it. They made the deadline. And this is really significant process. For the first time, this whole concept of how you do collaborative science, how you get people with very different perspectives, some of them have been debating on the opposite side of the fence for years, and to actually get folks together to wipe the slate clean and to really think how you can put things together properly, it certainly wasn't easy. And I think that the effort that Leo Winternitz and Val Connor as well as the professional facilitation provided by Bruce De Janeiro and Paul Jones and others, is really an incredible achievement. And it shows, yes, this can be done. So how it was put together, they essentially went out, accessed scientists, produced conceptual models. They used those conceptual models to frame key questions, what's really important here. And then from the key questions, have developed testable hypotheses. These testable hypotheses that you'll see in the report, there's still work that needs to be done there, but it's really refining some of the details. These key questions, it was agreed to focus on 3 of the most controversial issues. Those are 4x2, stop me if you would like to know more about the terminology. This is essentially an indicator of the amount of freshwater outflow that flows through the delta into the bay. The second is research around entrainment at the facilities. And the third area is taking a hard look at the South Delta salmon survival issues, where, of course, those survival rates are very, very low. So that's what was put together. As part of that submission of the report, there were some extra conditions that were put out by several of the parties to the lawsuit. And of course, these different parties, you asked for different conditions. So I think what was absolutely remarkable about this, and I'm sure Judge Damrell appreciates this, I think that the report was submitted like 10 or actually no, I think it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 10:30 the next morning, Judge O'Neill had responded. And his response was asking questions about these extra conditions. And so he asked for clarification on those questions to be submitted by tomorrow. And so the camp team's been working very diligently over the last 2 weeks and will be making a submittal back to him on Friday. So one of the questions with the caseloads for the judge was, yes, that information goes back. And this is such a complicated issue that he may choose to reflect and take time, but just the rapid response that he put out means I think this is going to move ahead potentially quite quickly. Also on that, I think it would be of great value is when the judge has made his decision to perhaps ask Val Connor, Leo Winternitz, Bruce De Janeiro to come in and reflect on their experiences of putting collaborative science together. And they actually told me this morning that they felt that the Delta Science plan was a necessary and critical ingredient. So I'll leave it there because we don't know how the judge is going to respond. But I think to get their feedback, what was useful, how do we move ahead from that? If you read the report in detail, you'll see there's a lot of reference to the Delta Science program and the Delta Science plan itself. So I think I'll stop there, you perhaps for now, and if there are any particular questions, but I would suggest we wait for the judge's ruling and then see, you have the leaders of this effort to come in and discuss it with you.
Okay, Dr. Goodwin, thank you. Any particular questions on any of the reporting items? Sometimes I feel like we're drinking from a fire hose when you provide all of the reports on all of the science activity in the Delta. It just underscores how complex and how active science is in on every issue.
Well, actually, I haven't finished yet.
Please proceed.